So when it comes to menopause and women experiencing PMS or PCOS or any sort of these other problems, is it possible that carnivore gets rid of that completely?
We have inflammation, and inflammation can cause anomalous tissue growth. All these foods that I write about in my second book, Good Fat is Good for Girls, Puberty and Adolescence, are interfering with the proper synthesis of hormones, both steroid and thyroid. That will definitely be a step in the right direction, but then we also have to talk about iodine. That is when their body is needing a ton of iodine and a ton of thyroid hormone, because women build more sexual characteristics than do men.
I am going to be living proof whether or not it does or doesn't basically damage your teeth, and if my teeth will be healthy. And I stopped brushing my teeth from that moment, and I've been carnivore for 2 years. And I still haven't had any plaque buildup. I went to the dentist himself. In fact, I asked him, I said, hey, so when was the last time you think I brushed my teeth? And he said, well, it looks like you brush your teeth about a day, or I mean, maybe even twice a day, because they look really clean. I don't see any plaque on them. It works. It works. Yeah. So the reduction of fluoride in this case, because this is what you're doing when you're basically not brushing your teeth, that helps reduce the amount of halide that you're exposing yourself to constantly, which is interfering with the iodine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there is no proof that fluoride prevents tooth decay. Not at all. It's actually the opposite.
Let's say somebody wants to supplement with iodine. Let's say they get the 2% version. How many drops of that 2% version would they need?
A lot of soy, things that interfere. Drink a lot of black tea, green tea, any tea. Those things will make it so the iodine has not been going in, so you're going to have to do a detox.
What about exercise? You talked a little bit about exercise.
Exercise doesn't keep you alive. Exercise just makes sure that you don't, break when you fall, that you're agile enough to get up from this chair, and you want to be able to get up off the floor. That's what exercise is. It does not save your life. This is all part of the stop eating fat propaganda.
Now, this is a very special guest, Elizabeth Bright. Now, she actually is the one who did inspire that cholesterol hormone synthesis cascade video. Yes, anybody who has seen that video, it is definitely from her. And the whole biochemistry behind it, all of the functions of cholesterol, how unbelievably important cholesterol is when it comes to not just hormone synthesis, but vitamin D, as well as bile acids. And just, it is unbelievably important, as well as some other things I have not fully yet covered, like iodine, for instance, which it will be very interesting, and exercise, and a little bit more on that. But before we get into any of that, first, tell us a little bit about yourself. And how exactly was your journey to optimal health?
Okay. Well, I went carnivore at 52. I'm now 62. In 2 months, I'm 62. And I had pretty much eaten a balanced diet. My mother used to cook everything from scratch. So I think we were only allowed to have sugar on Sundays, that kind of a thing, like not your standard. I lived in Europe from 2 to 8. So probably ate a lot of bread, but not a lot of, in those days, there wasn't a lot of sugar. Well, there were cakes and things, but not your standard American diet. And then I became an osteopath. Well, I lived in China. I did martial arts also. I studied a little bit of Chinese traditional medicine. And I then moved to Italy. And I started seeing patients of a certain age, women who had sort of the same presentation. And I would, in my osteopathic view, fix them. Osteopathy is not just adjusting bones, it's also reducing tissue inflammation and congestion and making things flow better and that kind of stuff. So I went back to school and became a naturopath. And right around that time, I went into, somewhat later, I went into menopause. And I started reading about, actually, Amber O'Hearn's work because I had already specialized in thyroid function, about T3 hormone, and how it wasn't necessarily an issue to not eat carbohydrates if you were carnivore for T3 hormone levels. And that's what got me started. And I wrote a book on menopause called Good Fat is Good for Women Menopause, because I was horrified by what I saw online of the symptoms of what was supposedly going to happen to me, which didn't, but it didn't ring right to me as an active person, as a I mean, I knew my mother actually did have Alzheimer's later, but the symptoms, I figured that there was something else that was causing these menopausal symptoms and not menopause itself. And so I looked at Kristen Hawk's work, the grandmother hypothesis, and all that kind of stuff. And that kind of just blossomed into good fat is good for women, menopause, that the symptoms are not due to reduced estrogen levels.
So, was there any downside that came from being carnivore that you experienced at all, or was everything just a complete upside?
Everything was a complete upside because I went into it with high fat. So what I learned was that I needed fat, that I couldn't just take out the glucose. We know that ketosis and glycolysis are the only ways we can metabolize energy, and protein kind of sits there in the middle, and it's sort of hanging on the fence. If you don't have, for instance, your body won't want you to cannibalize itself. So it's not a good pathway, I guess you'd say, to metabolize protein for energy. Your body's always going to be looking for glucose or ketones, fat. So I started pretty much high fat. And so no, there was no downside. There was no flu. There was no, all these things that were associated with it, which I found in my work with my patients, that especially if they're eating just a pound of meat and a pound of meat and a pound of meat, or a pound of meat and a pound of meat, they are going to have symptoms, because where's their energy coming from?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, when it comes to glycolysis and gluconeogenesis, and actually just quite literally being able to use the fatty acid in the first place. I mean, it's either fatty acid or it's glucose. There's not really much of an in between. I mean, there are like ketones, and then there are a couple others like lactate, but that's regardless, that's not, it's mostly just glucose or fatty acid. So, are there any like unexpected results from carnivore that you got?
No, well, I guess right around the same time, I stopped exercising for 2 years, because I had been, while I was working, I also had a martial arts school. I'm a Kung Fu master. I was going back and forth to Hong Kong with students. I was performing. And I think some of my training, not the part in China, but the part in the US, led me to really push my adrenals to the limit. Before I did that, I was running, I don't know, I was running 9 to 10 miles 6 days a week in my 30s, which now is nuts. So right around that time, I guess you could say, and which is what I make clear in my book, that road of exercising a lot kind of made me go up against a wall. And right at the same time, I had this eureka moment of, I need to eat a ton of fat. And so I just segued right into that, and realized that I had been pushing myself too hard. I mean, I was in a lot of pain when I was doing all that Kung Fu, certain positions, certain overtraining, and all that went away, and I didn't have to be popping, ibuprofen and things like that. And it sort of happened naturally, and that sort of is what helped me understand my learning, helped me understand exactly how to transition, you might say, into menopause and into carnivore.
So I guess we'll go there then. So when it comes to menopause and women experiencing PMS or PCOS or any sort of these other problems, would carnivore help with that? And if so, why? And is it possible that carnivore gets rid of that completely?
High fat carnivore is definitely anti-inflammatory. So as you were talking about RS, so we have inflammation, and inflammation can cause anomalous tissue growth. And so high fat carnivore will obviously be removing substances that are interfering with the steroid hormone cascade, flax seeds, oatmeal, all that, all these foods that I write about in my second book, Good Fat is Good for Girls, Puberty and Adolescence, are interfering with the proper synthesis of hormones, both steroid and thyroid. So that will definitely be a step in the right direction. But then we also have to talk about iodine, because most women will run into problems during adolescence, because that is when their body is needing a ton of iodine and a ton of thyroid hormone, because women build more sexual characteristics than do men. So uterus gets bigger, ovaries get bigger, breasts get bigger. And that is when sort of the health journey goes downhill for many people, because either they're dieting, fasting. I mean, I was eating 500 calories a day for 3 weeks. Then I went on a ski trip and passed out when I was 15. And they are also more, as you know, more and more iodine insufficient. And that's just had this cascade effect of many women are hypothyroid anyway. They're having kids, and then it just keeps going on and on. So it's for people who have endometriosis, have PCOS, it is definitely a glitch in their synthesis of the steroid hormones, but it is not just eat a lot of fat and make it go away. It would be possibly to some extent for a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old, but you have to have the iodine. If you don't have the iodine, it's not going to happen.
So let's say people want to move towards carnivore, but is there any level of fruits or vegetable or honey or milk that they can have, or anything like that? Or will it cause problems? What will it do? Is it okay?
It depends on where you are. So milk, there's a book by Keith Woodford, a Australian researcher, called The Devil in Milk. Paula Bresson did a paper from her research with that and gluten on, how gluten and milk are associated with schizophrenia. So milk, no, not a good thing. Honey is very high in fructose, which we know just bypasses the liver right away and goes straight to. So, I would say humans evolved to grab some berries off bushes in a certain season. They did not evolve to eat mangoes and durian all year long. And those are the foods that are really gonna, shock your system with a lot of glucose. So I don't think a young teenager doesn't have to be 100% carnivore. I think some fruits and berries are going to be okay. But it really, if the person has, if she's menstruating at 9, I would stay away from the fruit for a while. If she's depressed, anorexic, I would definitely stay away from the fruit for a while, just because it's also a stimulant. It is also, they are in a stress state. Gluconeogenesis is happening too often and too much just because of the stress state, the cortisol that we're probably going to talk about. And that would mean that it's like, an injection of stimulants.
So why exactly in terms of what exactly are you doing when you're eating carbohydrates? Like, what hormone are you stimulating, and why is that a good thing or a bad thing? What are the side effects of that? So for instance, carbohydrates, and why is that bad, or is it not bad?
They are stimulants. So they are not nutrition. There is no nutritional value to them. We metabolize carbohydrates on our tongue. Boom. That's why people get an immediate reaction. People who are very tired are going to say, oh, I want sugar. Whereas, 10,000 years ago, they wouldn't be dragging themselves over to, a bush of berries. I think that the issue is more that today's human is so much more stressed and is so much more imbalanced that it's basically an injection of, I don't know, it's a stimulant. It's like smoking a cigarette or snorting cocaine or taking speed. I can have some sweet. I can have a piece of bread. It's going to give me indigestion, but I'm not going to, crawl the walls, because I don't have, I'm carnivore every day, that I have more resilience. I have more metabolic resilience that somebody who is not well, has blood sugar imbalances, won't have. So it really takes time to get all that balanced out, and then it won't be as damaging.
So let's go on the cholesterol hormone synthesis cascade. Now, when it comes to the cholesterol hormone synthesis cascade, what exactly could be the problems, for instance, if you don't get enough cholesterol, maybe of one thing or another, and maybe let's say there'd be one pathway, or maybe you have some sort of maybe genetic predisposition or genetic problem, which prevents or isn't necessarily as efficient at basically making that hormone go in that direction or maybe this direction. So,
okay, well, yeah, the interesting thing about that, and I'm actually writing an article. I have all my articles. I've just put up all my articles on my website. and a membership plan. The thyroid actually turns all those genes on and off. So I don't really, there's a ton of money being made in genetic testing and this and that, but your thyroid decides which genes are on or off, the good or the bad. So the cholesterol that you have to eat it, you have to eat it. You have to be able to synthesize it, which is every single, in that famous hormone cascade, there are these black arrows, right? Those black arrows are regulated by T3, by thyroid hormone. The enzymes that turn one molecule into the other won't happen if you don't have enough thyroid hormone, or you have too much stress and you keep staying in the on the left side, which is the immune response. So there are several things that can go wrong.
And the way you would get in that immune response or constant stimulating of that immune response would be from eating carbohydrates.
Absolutely.
So that's, once again, another reason that you don't want to add carbohydrates in, because all it does is it just stimulates stress, basically.
Yeah.
So when it comes to, for instance, your practice or just dealing with patients, maybe, when it comes to gallstones, how often do you run into that? Do you run into that often when people are maybe shifting to carnivore and then suddenly they have this problem of, oh my God, I'm getting gallstones? And does that happen often, or does that not happen often?
Not really. I have people who, 80% of all cholecystectomies, the removal of the gallbladder, are done to women, and most of those women were hypothyroid. So you have to go back to, I have had people with kidney stones, I have had people with gallstones, and they were hypothyroid. Now, there is the issue of the bile. So if you have been avoiding fat for a long time, basically your gallbladder is going to atrophy, in the sense that it's just not going to know what to do with the fat when you start eating it. So you can help that along with supplements, but there is an absolute reduction in bile and hydrochloric acid and lipase and all the pancreatic enzymes in a hypothyroid state. More people are hypothyroid than you know it. More people are iodine deficient than you would think. So I've had more people without gallbladders than I've had people who had gallstones.
Okay, well, then we'll talk about iodine, because obviously it's really important. And I actually, side note for anybody watching, I do use iodine myself. I use it regularly, but I'm in America, so sadly we only have the 2% solution.
Not true. They hide the 5% link.
Really?
Hides it because of the yodophobes, and I'll send it to you afterwards. They just hide the link. It's very infuriating.
Wow. Okay. Well, yeah, I've been trying to look for the 5% version and I couldn't find it, but clearly she has it. So there we go. So I'll probably put that in the description you'll be able to see that in the video.
Okay.
Now, so I guess we'll talk about iodine. Now, what exactly makes iodine important? What is it used for?
Every single cell in the body has iodine receptors. Every single cell in the body. So basically, humans became vertebrate creatures when they crawled out of the sea, the iodine-rich swill of the sea. And the thyroid evolved from that. We had to have a way to process iodine, to trap it and to turn it into, everything that it's turned into. So the iodine is not just important for the thyroid, it's important for, in females, it's important for the uterus, the ovaries, the breasts, in the male, the prostate, but every single tissue, saliva glands, every gland, the thymus, the pituitary, every gland uses a ton of iodine. I recently posted an image from 1938 where they actually measured the quantity of iodine in human skin tissue, organs. And stress depletes iodine. High cortisol levels will deplete iodine. So if you compare today's light, stress from substances, from PFAs, from our phones, or everything that's around us to some extent, you'd say that a lot of iodine is being used, but there isn't any way to get it back. So unfortunately, a diet is not going to provide it for you. You used to get it in dairy, which I don't recommend anymore, but dairy, because the cow's teats were cleaned with iodine. but now they were made antiseptic with the iodine. But now they use chloride because it was at the time cheaper. So already there's a reduction in. They actually recommended dairy to girls in the UK because it was a huge iodine deficiency. Now that's no longer a source. So it's something you actually have to supplement with.
So I've heard a lot of things, or people being fearful of iodine. For instance, they might say things like it can really ruin your gut microbiome, or I've had a reaction to it before, or people have had reactions to it before. So what would you have to say to all of those responses?
Well, I wrote a long article on where those arguments came from, but you can react to iodine if you are toxic with halides. We live in a fluoride atmosphere. A lot of people have water in their fluoride. Fluoride in their water. A lot of people have fluoride in their toothpaste. It's harder to find fluoride-free toothpaste than it is, to find fluoride-full toothpaste. Countries like Ireland mandate the putting fluoride in the water. So there's a huge fluorosis issue in Ireland, compounded by the fact that they didn't drink tea, which prevents the absorption of iodine. So there is a detox. There's a way to detox the halides from your iodine receptors. So that may be the reason they reacted. The other reason they reacted would be they actually have an inflamed thyroid, and their thyroid wakes up, gets the iodine comes in. They've been iodine deficient for a long time, and the thyroid basically says, "Oh, okay, now we got to go to work." And that can be that's you've disrupted the status quo. A lot of stuff can happen with that.
So this one was not in the interview questions, but this one's going to be a little shocking for you because this is something that I do personally, and I've done this actually for a very long time, and it did seem to work. And I'd like your thoughts on this because obviously you're talking about toothpaste. Now, for me personally, as a carnivore, when I started carnivore, I heard something along the lines of our ancestors basically never brushed their teeth. And I got really curious by that. And I decided, quite literally, based on my carnivore journey, I said, if carnivore really works at the very start of it, I am going to be living proof whether or not it does or doesn't basically damage your teeth, and if my teeth will be healthy. And I stopped brushing my teeth from that moment. And I've been carnivore for 2 years. And I still haven't had any plaque buildup. I went to the dentist himself. Even the dentist couldn't tell that I actually had plaque on my teeth. In fact, I asked him, I said, hey, so when was the last time you think I brushed my teeth? And he said, well, it looks like you brush your teeth about a day, or maybe even twice a day, because they look really clean. I don't see any plaque on them. And that was the moment where I looked at that and I went, there is no way. It works. It works. Yeah. So I found that very interesting. Do you think that this, for instance, the reduction of fluoride in this case, because this is what you're doing when you're basically not brushing your teeth, that helps reduce the amount of halide that you're exposing yourself to constantly, which is interfering with the iodine?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is no proof that fluoride prevents tooth decay. Not at all. It's actually the opposite. So unfortunately, that is, yes, I think that it's absolutely fine.
Yeah. So there you go. It works. And it's an even better reason possibly to do it if, once again, I'd be careful if you add in things like dairy or maybe honey or any of that, because I did notice from, at least from my understanding, deuterium content is higher, which could stimulate and help growth factors for bacteria for anybody out there. So bad for your cavities. You don't want that. Or maybe vitamin and mineral interactions, but that's a completely different thing. So yeah, there you go. That's a little bit about me. There's a lot of other weird things I do, which we will cover one of them, which was bone density and exercise. And that one, a lot of people, I think, on my channel are very, very interested in. But we'll finish the iodine first, and then afterwards we'll cover that, because I think I might have another interesting experience on that, which might shock you. All right. So when it comes to iodine, again, how exactly could you get this iodine? What forms could you get this in? I
just recommend the 200-year-old lugols solution, which you can only find the 2%, but there is the 15% solution was the actual recipe that Jean Lugol came up with in 1829. They used it for a lot of illnesses back then. And the 5% that you sell in the States, well, that's everywhere right now, is actually 15%. So the interesting thing is when COVID happened in Europe, before COVID happened in Europe, none of my patients could get iodine. They could not find lugols. The only place they could get it from was in the UK. So I started making it for them. As soon as COVID hit Europe, every single Amazon in Europe, and there's, Amazon Spain, Amazon Italy, Amazon France, they started selling lugols iodine because it's an antibacterial and antiviral. So this old knowledge that everybody had always had, all of a sudden, oh, we can make money off of this because iodine is an antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal. Let's sell it.
So when it comes to, for instance, let's say somebody wants to supplement with iodine, how exactly, let's say they get the 2% version. How many drops of that 2% version would they need? And then maybe the 5% version, how many drops of that to know that it's adequate?
What you're trying to do is top up the cells, right? So if you've been living on oatmeal and flax seeds and I don't know, eat a lot of sweet potatoes, a lot of soy, things that interfere, drink a lot of black tea, green tea, any tea. Those things will make it so the iodine has not been going in. So you're going to have to do a detox. Or, in that case, I would just recommend, what you're eventually trying to do is top up the cells, make yourself sufficient. And then all you have to do is add a little bit. So I would recommend starting with 4 drops, 2%. 5% and 8 drops, 2%, because that we know is the minimum it takes to render you sufficient when you are sufficient. So daily, you're going to be using it, burning through it, just like any essential nutrient, any mineral in your body. So you have to keep putting it in daily. So to get you to that point, I don't know where the person's at. It really depends. And there's a patch test that I do because I'm in Europe, and there's the Hakala lab test in the US, which can test 24-hour uptake. You ingest 50 milligrams of iodine. You collect your urine for 24 hours, and they see how much bromide and chloride come out and how iodine sufficient you are. It's not necessarily something you have to do. You could start with, like I said, the 4 drops of the 5% at a minimum.
So let's say somebody has a little bit of a reaction, or maybe they feel something a little weird after taking it, or maybe even the taste is a little bad, or maybe they're not used to it. Yeah. So how exactly would you recommend to, for instance, you recommend water with it, or what exactly would you do?
It is a mineral. So you can't just stick it on your tongue or chug it. You have to definitely dilute it with water. You can put it in gelatin caps. That's what we do. And you could start small. Start with 1 drop. Definitely start with 2% if you had a reaction and see how it goes. Over time, the things that are attached to your iodine receptors, the iodine will just take out because it will remove those substances.
So what's the worst reaction that you'll get, let's say, if somebody's going through a detox phase and they're basically just trying to dump all these other halides out?
I've usually heart palpitations is what I've seen. I haven't seen anything worse than that. Heart palpitations because your thyroid will all of a sudden start making thyroid hormone when it has not had the raw materials to do so, and you might have heart palpitations. People talk about a metallic taste. I haven't seen that. I haven't really had people have any issues.
So is it possible, for instance, let's say somebody has Hashimoto's, right? When it comes to having extra iodine for them, is that dangerous for them? Is it not dangerous for them?
No, they need iodine. They have an inflamed thyroid. The lymph tissue in their Hashimoto's is just a different kind of thyroiditis. So all of the tissue can become inflamed. In Hashimoto's, Dr. Hashimoto cut out 4 goiters he cut out the goiters of 4 women in the 20s, and he opened them up, and he saw that instead of the follicular tissue of the thyroid, which is the tissue that makes the hormone, it was the lymph tissue in the thyroid that had become inflamed and swollen. So the difference being this started with just like, it's like an urban myth. There's absolutely no reason why somebody with an inflamed thyroid needs to reduce inflammation by removing substances that are interfering with the absorption of iodine, because it's actually an iodine deficiency that is causing the antibodies to be created.
So what are some of the substances then that would interfere with that? And maybe in their everyday life, what could those substances look like? What could they encounter?
Soy, oats. Everybody's drinking oat milk these days. They're avoiding dairy and they're drinking oat milk, almond milk, any kind of dairy, any kind of fake milk. PFAs, which are kind of unavoidable in our atmosphere today. Tea, as I said, brassica, broccoli, cabbage, bok choy, kale, Brussels sprouts, all those vegetables. There's a lot. There's a bunch. Hypertension medication. I mean, there's all kinds of substances that interfere with the absorption of iodine.
So besides the ones that they eat, are there any ones, for instance, where they will experience this very often? Maybe they should completely avoid that sort of an area. Do you know of anything of that sort, or no?
An area. Pool.
Like
pools.
A pool.
A pool with full of chloride. Yeah, chlorine is a halide. So there are chlorine-free pools, but I mean, when you are iodine sufficient, you don't have to walk around being afraid of everything. That's the whole point. It's like this big shield you have against all the crap. As I said, it's an antifungal, antibacterial, antiviral. It is a heavy metal chelator, which is what is in vaccines. And so, yeah, you don't have to be so afraid of everything if you are iodine sufficient.
So what would you do to measure whether or not you're getting enough iodine, or whether or not you have enough iodine? Maybe. Is there a test for that, or?
The Hakala lab test, which is a 24-hour uptake test. I don't even know how much it costs in the US, but you can do it a couple of places in the US. And there's the old iodine patch test, which is you see how long it lasts on your skin. Obviously, some of it is going to evaporate, but it has been, I had a patient who did both and they came out exactly the same. The results were the same.
So is this possibly the reason why people report having low testosterone on carnivore, or is that something that they should worry about? Is it because the thyroid hormone is basically that precursor in order to determine whether or not they are or aren't getting that testosterone?
Absolutely. It's the thyroid hormone that decides how much or which molecule is going to be synthesized. And if there's a lot of stress, you're always going to stay over on the left, which is the stress response. So, testosterone is just before estrogen, estradiol. So you got to get all the way to the right. That's a lot of steps to get you there. If you're hanging out over here with cortisol and aldosterone, and you're not eating enough fat to make sure that you can ramp it up and get it over there, it can go wrong.
Yeah. Oh, man. So once again, anybody out there, low testosterone on carnivore, this could definitely help. Well, it will help actually, because that's literally what iodine does. And she's saying it, and my cholesterol hormone synthesis cascade video, I also talk about that. So this, once again, very, very essential. Now, what about exercise? You talked a little bit about exercise. So explain what you're doing with exercise right now.
I'm an avid paddleboarder. I live about 2 blocks away from the Adriatic. So I go out most 4, max 5 times a week, and I paddleboard 6K on the sea. To me, somehow, even though my heart rate is as high as I was running, but it's much more meditative. So it's not affecting me. If I went running now because of the fighting I did and the martial arts I did, I would probably have, arrhythmia. But the paddleboarding doesn't bother me. So it's a combination of water, and it's a completely different thing. But I don't recommend anybody who is having health issues, to do more than 15 minutes of cardio, because we know that raises cortisol. I literally stopped exercising for 2 years, and then I went back to it slowly. So you can stop. Exercise doesn't keep you alive. Exercise just makes sure that you don't, break when you fall, that you're agile enough to get up from this chair, and you want to be able to get up off the floor. All that's what exercise is. It does not save your life. This is all part of the stop eating fat propaganda that came with that at the same time. We used to work. We used to go up and down stairs and work and carry our groceries, and now everybody wants to go to the gym at 4 o'clock in the morning. To lose weight. It does nothing for your immune system. It hinders if your cortisol levels are high, it hinders your immune function. And the studies that they've done with elite athletes, people whose cortisol is high because they are in competition, these were runners, a high fat diet brought their cortisol down much quicker than a carbohydrate diet.
So would you say it's healthy or it's a good idea to exercise every day? And if so, how long should they exercise? Or maybe should they just not exercise that often? Or what exactly would you say in terms of recommendations?
Again, it depends on where you're at. So I probably wouldn't do more than 3 days back to back, because for me, it's 61 3/4, whatever. I wouldn't do it every day but I also interchange with some weights. I don't, I'll take 2 days off a week. So I guess I do 5 days usually, but 2 of those days or one of those days will be weights, because you have to kind of get low, almost surfer position when you're dealing with waves. If you're not feeling well, if you're just starting your journey, as people like to call it, I wouldn't worry about exercise. Walking, smelling flowers, hearing birds, all that, getting from sympathetic mode to parasympathetic mode. I recommend Yang style Tai Chi, which I used to teach. That combines movement with positioning your joints with breathing. It's not as low as the other kinds of Tai Chi that make you get into a squatting position, which can be hard on people to start with. So that is just weight training, walking, Yang style Tai Chi. That is what I recommend, because you're trying to move from sympathetic mode to parasympathetic mode. Because if you're constantly running away from danger, you're always going to be in sympathetic mode, and everything's going to be on fire, and you're just going to burn out.
So is there any arguments that you can think of why exercise could be unhealthy? Because I've heard people talk about that. And does that make any sense to you? Or does it have some validity or nothing at all?
It's definitely unhealthy if you have high or low cortisol levels. You're trying to bring that back into line. It's just like saying, is snorting coke unhealthy? Yeah, it's unhealthy. It does the same thing. Exercise, cardio, and excess will do the exact same thing. Cannabis, exact same thing, raises cortisol levels. HRT does the same thing, raises cortisol levels. We have to avoid these activities and substances that raise our cortisol levels. So a lot of people are addicted to endorphins, because why? When you're running away from danger, you need to not feel the pain in your limbs so you can get the hell out of there. But if you do this every single day, you never recover, because you're only supposed to resort to that stress response in order to survive war, famine. A tiger, comes into your village. So my daughter, my youngest, almost died in a car accident when she was 18. She literally, her cortisol kept her alive. Her cortisol level shot through the roof to keep her alive. Now, I had to treat her for a couple of years after, because then her cortisol levels crashed, which is what happens to elite endurance athletes. Their cortisol levels crash because they do it too much, too long, too often.
So you would say that constant elevation of cortisol would actually reduce lifespan, or it would just cause more problems in the process?
Yes, my husband is an ex-bicycle racer, and we're always getting into these things about athletes. Wow, the human body is amazing. It can do that. Yeah, it's amazing. Look what it can do when it has to run away from danger, what it has to do to survive. But I think that, professional athletes don't live as long as most people.
Wow, that's a very interesting tip. There we go. So already there's something a little bit interesting on the exercise part. Now, this one, okay, once again, this is another personal experience thing, something that I've been experimenting with myself, and I'd like your thoughts on it because this is sort of interesting. Now, people always tout that exercise is really important for bone density. Now, for me, I found another way to stimulate this bone density, and it's very unconventional for that matter, but I did notice that it does seem to work because when I do it, as time goes on, I get very, very used to it. And it has to do with Wolff's Law. I'm not sure if you've heard about that sort of thing before. Basically, increasing bone density through pressure. For instance, when astronauts go up into space, they lose
I know.
bone density.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I do to increase bone density without having to stimulate it through exercise, and once again, it's going to be a crazy thing, I sleep on the floor. What do you think about that? Because obviously it's very uncomfortable at first, but do you think there could be anything valid behind it, or is it just stupid that I'm doing this?
I don't know. I mean, you increase bone density just by bumping up and down on your heels too. Um, I think that I'm not sure about that one. I haven't, I think sleeping on the floor, you would be, yes. So you're not cushioning your bones, and so you're putting them under duress. I guess is what you're trying, what you're doing by sleeping on the floor. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this whole bone density thing is sort of there is no such thing as osteopenia. They rigged the tests, the whole test for women's bone density that women do are rigged because they're using the bone density measures of 30-year-old women, trying to have 60 and 50-year-old women have the same bone density. They won't. They don't. So they will always come out with a low measure because of how statistically these tests are rigged. So I don't know. I don't think about bone density a lot. Obviously, inflammation is going to worsen bone density. We know that fluoride reduces bone density. Fractures are absolutely what happens with fluorosis, but also high cortisol. When I was in school, we were taught to be very careful in adjusting people who have had cortisone shots because high cortisol and cortisone shots over time are very inflammatory. So your brain neurons burn, but also your bones become very powdery and easily fractured.
Yeah. So, oh man, there's a lot of other things that I can think of. Have you ever heard of Poltov and the resurrectionists? Basically,
No, I haven't. Sorry.
so this whole thing of why thyroid, for instance, the thyroid. So Poltov, back in the day, he studied basically sudden infant death syndrome, and he was trying to figure out the cure to it. And he got his data from resurrectionists who always measured people who were under chronic stress over and over and over again. And not only that, they were poor people. So they were, yeah, right. They were basically in poverty.
That's too. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. So basically what ended up happening was Poltov ended up seeing, oh, wow, look at all these babies who are basically under higher income families. They all seem to have bigger thymuses. Therefore, the correct solution to this is to irradiate the thymus and to shrink the thymus. And this was done for 30 years, which shocked me. So was there any sort of other biggest medical mishaps in history related to that and thyroid hormone? Because I think that
Yeah, that'll kill your thyroid. Yeah, there's so many horrible medical. Well, fluoride is one of them, right? So we know. I mean, there were people screaming when they started mandating fluoride in the water in the U.S. and people screaming, saying that that was the worst thing you could do. So it happens all the time. There are many, and too many to count, unfortunately.
Ugh, yikes. So would you say there's one that's probably the worst? Would that be the fluoride in the water, or was there another one before that happened that I'm not aware of?
Well, how did surgery? Surgery has always been mostly done on women. Women's organs women have been experimented on and used as guinea pigs. Obviously, more poor women than wealthy women, but women in general by medicine. I talk about this in my book, Good Fat is Good for Menopause. Good Fat is Good for Women, Menopause, about how medicine has historically used women as guinea pigs. And surgeons were trying out new stuff all the time. Most women died at the hands of surgeons. Women who had cancers in the 1800s who were working long days in the factory and all they had was gruel to eat. Sure, they got cancer. Sure, surgeons wanted to cut them up, cut that cancer out. Most of them died. I think a lot of the stuff that happened in the Victorian era was probably worse than the fluoride, just as bad as the fluoride.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, the fluoride in the water, by the way, anybody who's still drinking. Oh, so for instance, I guess we'll go on to water. So how exactly would you get or prevent this fluoride from being in the water, or maybe the PFAS as well, because they interfere? Like what should people do when it comes to that sort of stuff?
Well, first you need iodine, and then you get a filter. I mean, I live in Italy, and nobody drinks water from the tap. They all go around with these huge cases of 200 2-liter bottles, or they have people deliver them, and all I'm thinking is PFAs. Oh my God, and they're everywhere. But the Italians do not want to buy water filters. Very few. If I'm going to get, people always comment, Italians always start commenting and saying, oh, but no, do not have water. Very few have water filters. We have a water filter, and I think that's something that people should invest in instead of buying all these bottles of water. So there are places, of course, that have good water. There are places that have water that is devoid of minerals. People with septic tanks that have to add minerals back in. I mean, water is a source of minerals. You have to sort of figure out what condition it is. Not every state in the U.S. does have fluoride in the water. I have no idea which ones they are right now. I'm more familiar with the Gordy Belt in the U.S., but minerals come from water, and salt, of course.
So what kind of filter do you use, for instance? Because people might look for a filter, but they don't necessarily know what they're looking for. What kind of filter is?
You just have to look at says what do they filter. So we bought a filter that supposedly gets some PFAs out. I don't buy it 100%, but it'll definitely makes the water softer, because the water in Italy is very hard. So every single appliance has got yellow stuff in it because of the high mineral content. I wouldn't be able to tell you. I don't know the brand. Culligan. I don't know. I'm not in the US. There's all kinds of, you just have to do your homework and look at the reviews and see what do they actually filter and what percentage.
Which one do you use in Europe, for my European viewers?
No idea. I don't know. It's
no?
who does. In restaurants, we like carbonated water, so we get it has a thing with regular water, fizzy water. So I have no idea what the name of it is. I look at the specs. I look at the specs.
So yeah. So for any of my European viewers out there, yes, by the way, everybody who's commenting, have I been to Ljubljana? Yes, I have been to Ljubljana. I used to live in Europe, for that matter. A lot of my life, actually, I lived in Europe. I've only been to the America recently. Honestly, I personally like it better in Europe. That's just my opinion. But I lived in the Netherlands, Groningen. So for anybody who's curious, I lived in Netherlands. I lived in Frankfurt, Germany.
Oh, I did lived in Frankfurt. Or my stepmother, my dad lived in Frankfurt for years. I lived in Munich and Bonn, and then my father married somebody from Frankfurt and spent every summer there.
Yeah. Honestly, so any of my American viewers watching, Europe is a pretty nice place, my personal opinion. So if anybody wants to know anything more about you, where could they find you? What are some of your sources? I'll put all of that in the description for anybody who's wondering.
Okay, I have my website is elizbright.com. Everything's there. My books are there. My books are also on Amazon. There's 2 books. Good Fat is Good for Women Menopause and Good Fat is Good for Girls, Puberty and Adolescence. I had tried to write a thyroid book, but it's just I can't write it fast enough. So I've put my research, and I'm doing it, adding to it every month on my website in this membership thing that I've just done, which I've never done before. I do have an Instagram channel. One of them got hacked, so it's much smaller than it used to be. I really am too busy to do a whole lot on social media. I'm not an influencer. I'm just putting information out there so people can educate themselves.
Do you have a YouTube channel at all?
No, I stopped because they would put ads on. You couldn't turn off the ads thing, and I saw ads that I didn't like, so I said, heck with this.
Whatever. All right. So yeah, thanks again for watching, everybody. This has been really interesting. I might even add some things later. I'm not necessarily too sure. It depends. But regardless, thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.